Hi, my name's Anara. And when I was 10, my parents dropped me off at a crisis care center like I was a package they forgot to return. They told me it was temporary, said they just needed a little space. Then they flew to Europe with my sister. I didn't see them again for years, until they showed up broke, smiling and asking for help. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is, they planned it. Every word, every step. They took my name, my credit, even the inheritance my grandmother left me. And when I finally started to speak out, they tried to silence me, again. But what happens when the forgotten child refuses to stay quiet? The heater in the car blew warm air on my legs, but the rest of me was frozen. I sat in the back seat, cradling a duffel bag that held more space than items. A sweatshirt, a toothbrush, and a note that didn't even list a phone number, just my name and a street I didn't recognize. Mom and Dad sat in the front, their bodies stiff, their voices absent. I wanted them to say something, anything, but the silence was louder than words. We pulled into a small parking lot in South Minneapolis, just off a side street I'd never seen before. It looked like any other brick building from the outside, except the sign read, Youth Stabilization and Crisis Center. My stomach flipped. I asked Dad where we were, but he didn't answer. Mom turned in her seat, forcing a smile that didn't make it to her eyes. "This is just for a little while," she said, brushing a non-existent speck off my coat. "We need some time to figure things out." "Time?" I repeated. "What kind of time?" Dad cleared his throat. "You'll be safe here, Anara." I remember reaching for the door handle, then pausing. I wanted to ask if I'd done something wrong, but I couldn't speak. My throat had locked shut. I climbed out into the icy wind, the kind of cold that made your nose sting. They walked me to the door, handed off the bag to a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard. Mom gave me a quick hug. Dad didn't hug me at all, just shook my hand like I was a neighbor kid he barely knew. No tears, no last look back. Then they left. I stood in that entryway, watching their taillights disappear. I told myself they'd turn around, that this was some test, some twisted parenting game. But the car never stopped, never slowed. I didn't know it then, but they were never coming back. The intake form misspelled my name. They left out the second A. I corrected it twice before giving up. The room they led me to smelled like antiseptic and sadness. There was a bed in the corner, with a folded blanket and a pillow that looked like it had been punched into submission. "This is temporary," the staff woman said. Her voice was kind, but her eyes said, "Don't ask questions." She moved on before I could speak. For days, I sat waiting by the window. I watched snow collect along the fence and wondered if they were watching it fall, too. I imagined them stuck in traffic, or trying to call but losing my number. The rationalizations kept me company more than the people did. One night, a younger staffer brought me a second blanket without saying a word. I nodded a thank you. She smiled softly before walking away. It was the first moment in that place that felt human. That night, I whispered my name into the dark just to remind myself I existed. 2 years passed. I was 12 when they gave me an iPad, donated by some church youth group. I didn't use it for games. I searched everything I could. Their names, my sister, school news, Facebook, then Instagram. That's where I found Callista. The first photo that came up was her in Paris. Eiffel Tower behind her, her hair in soft waves. She wore a white dress I remembered her begging Mom to buy. Caption, "Paris with my favorite people." I scanned the faces. Mom, Dad, smiling, holding drinks. Then I noticed her wrist. The bracelet, woven thread, lopsided beads. I had made it for her on my 9th birthday. She used to wear it to bed. And she still wore it. She remembered the bracelet, but not me. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. I had been edited out. She didn't lose me. She deleted me. At 13, I was placed with a therapist who saw me once a week in a room that smelled like lemon-scented wipes and burnt coffee. She didn't push. She waited. Sometimes we sat for the full 40 minutes without speaking. But in those silences, I learned to breathe again. One session, she handed me a notebook and pen. I didn't write right away. But that night, alone in my room, I opened to the first page and wrote a single sentence. What makes a child worth keeping? I stared at those words for a long time. I didn't answer them. Minnesota nights were brutal. That winter, the snow came earlier than usual. One night, while everyone else slept, I stood by the frosted window, watching flakes fall in slow spirals. The world looked peaceful from inside. But inside me, something had gone quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I froze. Because somewhere inside me, even at 10, I knew this wasn't temporary. It wasn't a break. It wasn't about time or space. It was about removal. They had erased me to make room for something else. Back then, I didn't have the words. But now, years later, I do. And the next time I saw Callista, she pretended she didn't know me, so I went digging into the past they'd tried to erase. It started with me just trying to blend in. After I aged out of the system, I got into a community college near downtown, and I told myself I could disappear into the crowd. No questions, no history. Just another 18-year-old with a backpack and a blank stare. But no matter how quiet I was, the past kept clearing its throat. Orientation was held in a wide, echoey auditorium that smelled like old varnish and fresh nerves. I sat 2 rows from the back, half listening to some overly peppy student ambassador walk us through campus values. My name tag had a typo again, Anna instead of Anara. It figured. Then I saw her, Callista. She moved through the crowd like she owned the place, hair curled, posture perfect, that same effortless glow she'd always had in our parents' eyes. My breath caught in my throat. I thought she'd walk right past me, but she didn't. She looked directly at me. Her eyes paused, for maybe half a second. Then she looked through me. No double take, no flicker of recognition. Just a glance, like I was a stranger she passed at a grocery store. And then she kept walking, laughing with a group of students I'd never seen before. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just sat there, hands cold, legs stiff, wishing I could sink into the floor. My own sister had turned me into a ghost. A few weeks later, I sat across from the campus therapist in a room that smelled like warm tea and printer ink. I hadn't planned on talking about anything real, but the words came out anyway. I saw her. She saw me. The therapist nodded, waited. She didn't say anything. More silence. She acted like I was no one. The therapist leaned forward slightly. Would you be open to requesting your records from child services? Sometimes, the facts help ground the feelings. I laughed, short and bitter. What if the facts make it worse? She didn't flinch. We can only heal what we're brave enough to read. A week later, I stood under flickering fluorescent lights at the county records office, holding a sealed manila envelope with my name on it, spelled correctly this time. The clerk barely glanced at me, just passed it over and called the next number. In a corner seat, far from the noise, I opened it. Termination of parental rights. Gregory and Vera Whitfield. The words felt like they didn't belong on paper, like they should have only existed as nightmares or rumors, not something so official, so sanctioned. Then I saw the line that cracked something open in me. Voluntary relinquishment for the welfare of the other child. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the paper. I didn't know whether to laugh or tear it in half. They'd let me go for her, on purpose, quickly, quietly, like I was luggage they left behind to board a better flight. Later that evening, with rain tapping against the library windows, I sat hunched over a study booth. My breath fogged up the surface of my laptop as I scrolled through old photos again, trying to make sense of moments that hadn't made sense back then. Mom telling me not everyone gets to shine. Callista getting 2 birthday cakes, one for the guests, one for photos. Dad insisting I give her the bigger slice because she's got that piano competition coming up. I stared at the sentence on the paper again. Not out of disbelief, out of realization. It wasn't that they were trying to save her from the chaos, they were trying to clear space for her to become something. I wasn't the child in danger, I was the obstacle. The bus ride home was long and quiet, and the windows reflected more of me than the city lights outside. I looked older somehow, even in that dim glass. My eyes sharper, shoulders tenser. I didn't feel like someone healing, I felt like someone waking up. If she could walk past me without blinking, maybe it was time I made it impossible for the world to ignore me. The fallout didn't take long to find me. It showed up in my inbox one Tuesday morning, an email from the university alumni office. I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when I saw the subject line, Family Matters Series welcomes our most inspiring alumna. I didn't need to open it, but I did. There she was. Callista Whitfield. My sister, now apparently a keynote speaker on resilience, family, and personal growth. The caption below her picture read, Our proudest alumna returns to share how love and loyalty shape us. Her smile was airbrushed, professional. Everything about her screamed curated. And something inside me settled. Not peace, just a kind of finality, like I'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop and now it had. I arrived early to the event, mostly to avoid attention. The auditorium had that fresh painted scent that clung to money. Students and faculty filled the seats, sipping free coffee and flipping through branded notebooks. I slid into the second row, hoodie up, silent. Callista walked onto that stage like she'd been born there. She started with a joke, something about struggling through dorm food and long lectures. Laughter rippled across the room. Then she transitioned smoothly into her message. Family isn't always perfect, she said, but when you grow through pain together, you become stronger. I stared. She went on about how her parents had supported her dreams, how she learned empathy through hard seasons, how not every wound needs to leave a scar. She never said my name, not once. Then the moderator asked the question, Did you have siblings growing up? Callista smiled sweetly, didn't miss a beat. I grew up as an only child. The air around me thickened. My fingers clenched into fists beneath the fabric of my coat. They hadn't just removed me from their house, they'd erased me from their narrative. Later that evening, the alumni social was held on a rooftop bar wrapped in string lights and soft music. I stood near the edge, trying not to be seen, when two women approached. You look so familiar, one of them said, squinting. The other chimed in. Weren't you that girl who had that episode back in high school? I blinked. Excuse me? You know, the one whose parents had to make a really hard decision, she continued, lowering her voice. They were saints, honestly. No parent should have to go through that. I didn't reply. Couldn't. The narrative had traveled, warped, and rooted itself in people who didn't even know me. They didn't just forget me. They rewrote me. Back home, I sat on the floor of my bedroom, my back against the dresser, a notebook in my lap. The air was still, like the pause between thunder and rain. They didn't just leave me, I whispered aloud. They edited me out. The words hung heavy, and they were true. I remembered something my old therapist once said. They only win if they get the last word. I wasn't trying to win, but I wasn't going to let them have the only version that existed. So I started to write. Not for revenge, not even for closure. I wrote to reclaim my own name. I was there, I was real, and I remember everything. The following night, I sat at my desk, eyes fixed on my laptop screen. My hands hovered over the mouse. I had edited a short, quiet video. No music, no dramatic flair, just truth. I titled it, The Child Who Wasn't an Only Child. The thumbnail was a photo of me at 10 years old, standing outside the crisis center, clutching a bag bigger than my body. I hit upload. As the progress bar filled, my voice echoed in the opening line. She stood on that stage and said she grew up alone. Let me show you what alone really looked like. The video had been up for less than a week when I got the first voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but the tone of the woman's voice on the recording sent a chill through me. "Ms. Whitfield, this is Maria from Horizon Credit Services. We've been trying to reach you about several accounts opened under your name that are now in delinquent status. Please call us back at your earliest convenience to resolve this matter." I replayed it twice, then opened the voicemail transcript. My name. My address. Well, my old one, the one from when I was still 10, before they dropped me off like unwanted luggage. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of identity theft. I hadn't applied for any credit cards. I hadn't even had a consistent mailing address until I turned 18. But the documents I pulled up next said otherwise. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The cards were opened when I was 11. 11. They hadn't just left me. They'd taken pieces of me with them. My name, my credit, my future. That evening, I sat on the couch with my laptop balanced on one knee, digging through records and running my own name through public databases. What I found wasn't a criminal mastermind's web of lies. It was worse. It was lazy, messy, desperate, unpaid rent notices, bounce-back checks tied to my childhood address, and then, buried on a second page of search results, a GoFundMe-style donation page. "Help the Whitfield family recover from loss." There it was. A photo of Callista, posed sadly near a beach. Mom's caption beneath it read, "Raising a daughter after trauma takes more than love. It takes support." They'd turned me into a backstory, a plot device, something tragic they could use for sympathy and a few $100s. And I had no say. 3 days later, I came home to find a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox with European postage and my name misspelled. The handwriting was messy, rushed. There was no return address, but it had been redirected from the foster address I lived at when I was 12. Inside was an invoice, a luxury dinner, 7 courses, wine pairings, private room rental, dated 4 months ago. The name listed under Honoree, Callista Whitfield. And the delivery location? Florence, Italy. The charge was more than what I had made during my entire first year working 2 part-time jobs at the bookstore and tutoring center. The total at the bottom blurred as I read it again. It had been mistakenly sent to my old crisis care center's forwarding service, which was how it ended up in my hands. They were dining under chandeliers while I was microwaving leftovers and arguing with credit bureaus. Later that week, I met up with Zoe, an old classmate who'd become one of the few people I trusted. We sat in the corner booth of a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. I laid the papers out between us. The credit report, the fundraiser page, the birthday invoice. Zoe leaned over the mess of documents, brow furrowed. "What the hell is this?" "My past," I said, voice flat. She tapped the invoice. "You could destroy them with this." "I don't want destruction," I said, surprising myself. "I want exposure." She looked at me for a long time. "Okay. So what does justice look like for you?" I stared out the window at a couple walking a dog in the rain. For them to not be able to hide behind fake smiles anymore. That night, I started bookmarking every news contact, social blog, and journalist I could find who had covered family issues, abandonment, or financial exploitation. I didn't know what I'd send them yet, but I knew I'd send something. It was just past midnight. The rain hadn't stopped, now tapping like fingertips against my windows. I sat in bed with my old laptop, scrolling through messages on an Instagram account I hadn't touched in years. Most of it was spam or long-forgotten friends trying to reconnect. Then one message stopped me cold. "If you're who I think you are, you deserve to know what else they did." No name, no profile picture, no bio. Just a gray circle and a few words that felt heavier than everything I'd uncovered so far. I stared at it for nearly a minute, heart beating slow but deep. Then I typed a response. "I'm listening." The message sat in my inbox like a grenade. Subject, Reunion Opportunity, Family Matters Network. I opened it, half expecting a scam, But the email was real, polished, eager. They'd seen my video, said it struck a chord with their team, said they believed in healing through storytelling, said the country was ready for a redemption arc. They wanted me, and they wanted them. A televised family reunion. Me, Callista, Vyra, Lenric. All of us in one room, telling our side for the sake of closure. Closure for who? They even called it that in the email. A chance for America to witness closure. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Closure isn't a gift you get from the people who tore you apart. It's what you build with your own hands when there's nothing left to salvage. Still, I wrote back. I agreed, but on my terms. That Sunday morning was unusually quiet. Warm breeze slipping through the window, the smell of cinnamon from the bakery down the street. I had just sat down with a cup of coffee when the knock came. Small envelope, no return address. Inside, a letter from a Minneapolis law office. My hands tightened when I saw the name on the header. Estate of Eleanor Whitfield. Grandma. I hadn't spoken about her much. She'd tried to stay in touch after I was placed in crisis care, but the system made that hard. Her last voicemail, left the year she died, still lived in my phone, unheard. The letter explained that a small sum had been left to me. Not much, but enough to know she hadn't forgotten me. Except the money was already gone, cashed and closed out, 5 years earlier. By Vera. Guardian on file, not even forged. Just filed legally under a lie so big the court didn't blink. My coffee went cold while I sat staring at the paper. Not out of surprise, but because rage has a way of freezing everything else inside you. That night, I climbed to the rooftop of my building with a blanket and a folder full of printed lies. The city buzzed beneath me, cars, lights, lives. But up there, it was quiet enough to think. I thought about Grandma, about her soft hands, her big laugh, how she used to say, "Don't let this world harden you, baby." But I wasn't hard, I was precise. And now, if they wanted a spotlight, I'd bring one they couldn't dim. The next morning, I sat at my desk. One screen showed the draft email to the producers. The other showed my folder, now labeled Truth, Not Reconciliation. My message was short. I will participate in your program. I request full editorial rights and the ability to present verified documents without censorship. If that is acceptable, I look forward to working with you. Attached were a scanned copy of the inheritance notice, screenshots from the donation page in my name, a transcript of Callista's speech where she claimed to be an only child. I read it twice before hitting send. Then I sat back, folded my arms, and breathed. 2 weeks later, I stood in a small studio in downtown St. Paul. The lights were too bright, the makeup artist too chipper. Callista was somewhere behind the black curtain. Vera and Lenric had already arrived earlier, shaking hands and nodding for the cameras. The producer, a woman about my age with kind eyes, pulled me aside just before the run-through. "Are you nervous?" she asked gently. I met her eyes. They had every chance to be honest. A pause. "What comes next is their choice, not mine." She nodded slowly. "This might change everything." I turned toward the set, where the lights were warming and the cameras were already rolling. And it did. Just not the way anyone expected. The stage was cold, colder than I expected for spring. Maybe it was the lights, or maybe it was the weight of what was about to happen. I stood in the wings, watching Callista sit in the makeup chair, her reflection more polished than the truth she'd soon face. Vera was already mic'd up. Lenric paced like a man auditioning for sympathy. The producer leaned in beside me, whispering, "They've been rehearsing how to phrase things. Make it sound thoughtful, not like blame." I didn't answer. I was too focused on the flash drive in my palm. It felt heavier than plastic, heavier than memory. Right before the interview was set to roll, I walked over to the control booth. I looked the tech in the eye and said, "Play this instead. No voiceover, no edits. Just roll it straight." The woman blinked. "You sure?" I nodded. Let the world see what they couldn't say out loud. It was grainy, the footage. Security cam style, slightly tilted, but it showed everything. Me, 10 years old, standing on the steps of crisis care, holding a duffel bag too big for my frame. Vera's voice in the clip. Don't make this harder than it has to be. No goodbye, no explanation. The broadcast went live. Social media caught fire. Comments flew in faster than the producers could moderate. Is this real? How do you leave your own child like that? Where were the cameras when she needed a family? I sat in the green room, watching the hashtags stack up. One producer called me, stunned. We've never had this kind of reaction before. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. This wasn't revenge, I said. It was correction. 2 days later, I came home to a pile of legal envelopes, one marked urgent. I opened it in the kitchen, standing by the counter like I had during every phone call that told me I didn't matter. Inside, a formal petition. Vera and Lenrick Whitfield request financial support from their adult daughter, citing years of emotional and economic hardship incurred in raising her. They were suing me, not because they had a case, because they wanted a new script. Their argument? My success was built on their sacrifices. I called my attorney, put her on speaker. She sighed, long and deep. They don't have legal standing, but that won't stop them from trying to guilt the court. I stared at the papers. They couldn't afford to raise me, but now I'm supposed to fund their failure? That night, I pulled out my camera again. No security footage this time, no outside sources. Just my voice. I filmed in my home office, dim lighting, walls covered in printed screenshots of comments from strangers who said I helped them feel seen. This time, I said into the lens, I want to talk to the people who think I owe them something. I held up the lawsuit, read pieces of it, then held up a copy of the letter from the state that confirmed I'd been relinquished. To anyone wondering why I speak out, it's because silence was my inheritance. It's the only thing they made sure I had, and I've paid that debt in full. The summons came 3 days after the video dropped. Malis stopped by to check on me and opened the envelope as I made tea. They're really going through with it, she said, skimming the legalese. They want you back in their narrative. I sat down slowly, folded the paper once, then again. They drew the line, I said, not to her, but to the room, to the world, to the version of me that once would have begged for understanding. Now I was done begging. Now I'll show them what happens when you cross it. The podcast studio was warm, the walls padded in thick black foam, the lights soft. I liked the quiet hum of the equipment, the way the host smiled at me like she knew I wasn't there to play the victim. I was ready, notes in my hand, truth at the tip of my tongue. But 2 minutes before we went live, her assistant walked in holding a phone. She whispered into the host's ear. His face changed instantly. I'm so sorry, Anara, he said, setting the headset down gently. We just got a cease and desist from your family's legal team. There it was. They're citing defamation, he added, guilt spilling out of every word. I didn't say much, just nodded, gathered my things, and left. But inside, something shifted. Not like the breaking before. This time, it was solid. Cold. Permanent. They never wanted me quiet. They wanted me erased. 2 days later, I held a reading at a small bookstore tucked between a used record shop and a faux restaurant. The kind of place where the shelves lean slightly and the chairs wobble. I read from my journals, the ones I'd kept since age 13. The room was small, the crowd smaller. But it felt right. After the signing, an older woman waited until everyone had filtered out. She wore a tan cardigan with elbow patches and carried a leather satchel worn from years of use. You won't remember me, she said softly, but I remember you. I tilted my head. I'm sorry? My name's Eliza, she continued. I was the housekeeper at your parents' place. You were maybe 5 the last time I saw you. I froze. I never forgot you, she said, and I've kept something I think you need to hear. She opened her bag and pulled out a folded piece of lined paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Mom's. She called it Notes to the Nanny back then, daily instructions, reminders, and warnings. This one read, Anara will be leaving soon. Don't mention anything to Callista yet. We'll explain it later. She needs space to grow without distraction. Distraction. That's what I was. She knew, Eliza said gently. Callista was told you were getting help, so she could thrive. I stood there, my hand still clenched around the paper, trying to breathe. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off. The TV was on mute, playing one of Callista's recent videos. I didn't know the full story, she told her millions of followers. I was just a kid. I only saw what they showed me. I watched her blinking slowly at the camera, the soft piano music swelling beneath her voice. I could almost believe her if I hadn't held the paper in my hand. She knew, and she chose herself. I uploaded Eliza's statement anonymously that night, reading it into my phone in a flat, clear voice. No music, no filter. It spread faster than I expected. The comments flooded in. She was complicit. How many lies can one family hold? Cancel Callista? But I didn't want cancellation. I wanted truth. Later that week, I walked late into the evening, phone pressed to my ear. Milas was on the other end. How far are you willing to go? She asked, not out of judgment, but concern. As far as they went to bury me, I said, watching the city blur past car windows. Maybe further. I told her I'd drafted the opening of a countersuit, identity theft, emotional damages, not to get rich, just to get heard in a courtroom where lies had legal limits. Good, she said. You deserve a space they can't rewrite. Back at my apartment, I opened the email draft addressed to their attorney. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't angry, I was ready. The following morning, my inbox pinged. A journalist had responded. We've reviewed the footage and Eliza's statement. We'd like to run a full piece, if you're willing. I stared at the message for a long time, fingers curled against the sides of my mug. This time, the world would hear my story. Not their version of it. The subject line read, You deserve to hear this. No name, no signature. Just an anonymous email sitting at the top of my inbox when I opened my laptop that morning. I hesitated. Clicked. Inside was a single audio file. No context, no explanation. I pressed play. At first, the background was muffled, ice cubes clinking in a glass, distant music, some light chatter. Then came the voice. Vera, slurred but unmistakable. She was too much, always crying, always needing. We had to choose. Callista had potential. That one, she had potential. There was a pause, a long sip, then quieter. We did what we had to. I sat there, the glow of the screen washing over my face, my hands unmoving on the trackpad. I listened 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. My jaw clenched so tightly I felt it in my temples. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't interpretation. It was confession. They hadn't chosen survival. They'd chosen strategy. By noon, I had rented a room at the community center where my nonprofit held monthly meetings. We sent out a quiet press release. Youth advocate sheds light on legal disenfranchisement. A few local reporters showed up. A small camera crew. Malis sat in the front row, her eyes calm but locked on me. I stood behind a basic folding table. No teleprompter, no frills. I'm not here for sympathy, I began. I'm here for clarity. I played the audio. The room stilled, eyes widened, pens stopped moving. Then I held up the documents. The credit reports, the foster care intake letter, the GoFundMe screenshots with my name. This silence? It wasn't mine. It was forced, and I'm not carrying it anymore. By the time I left the center, local networks had already picked up the story. Comments rolled in faster than I could read them. Messages from old classmates, strangers, former social workers. And then came the retaliation. 2 days later, I was in my attorney's office, scrolling through email threads she'd printed out. Vera and Lenrick had released a joint statement calling the audio a malicious fabrication. Callista followed up with a video post. Hair curled, eyes dewy, voice shaking. "We all make mistakes," she said, "but this is still my family, and families deserve the chance to heal." Their lawyer sent a cease and desist. Again. This time I didn't flinch. "Let them sue," I told my attorney. "I want the discovery phase. I want subpoenas. I want everything they've hidden dragged into the light." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? Discovery gets messy." I nodded. So was crisis care. The backlash didn't land the way they hoped. News anchors stopped reading their side of the story halfway through. Comment sections lit up with phrases like, "She knew and stayed quiet." Invitations rolled in from foster advocacy groups, youth shelters, even high school classrooms. They didn't want the scandal. They wanted the substance. Emails poured in, people who'd lived their own version of silence. Women abandoned for being inconvenient. Teens sent away for being reminders of past shame. Every message told me the same thing. You made me feel seen. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was being received. That evening, I stepped onto the rooftop of the community center. The sun was setting behind the skyline, casting a soft glow over the city. I leaned against the railing, a folded photograph in my hand. Mylise joined me quietly. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you feel better?" I shook my head. Not better, but freer. I took the photo, me, age 10, outside the crisis care entrance, and placed it gently on the ledge. "They called me a burden," I said, not to her, but to the sky. I became the voice they couldn't silence. I built something real after all this, and I made sure they could never take it away. In the weeks after the press conference, the world felt quieter. Not in a bad way, just settled. The emails kept coming, people from small towns, big cities, shelters, and rehab programs. Their stories weren't mine, but the ache in them was familiar. I read everyone. The donations to my nonprofit tripled. Even a few teachers who once avoided me in the hallways sent public apologies. One called me a lesson in everything we failed to see. Another mailed a handwritten note. I kept that one. The lawsuit from Vera and Lenrick disappeared quietly. No retraction, no apology. Just vanished, like it had never existed. But their names faded too. A few press outlets tried to keep the drama alive, but the audience had moved on. And me? I stayed. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It just leaves a silence where power used to be. A month later, I was setting up chairs in our new mentoring space. The building used to be a dental office. Now it held second chances. We had whiteboards, beanbags, and a bulletin board titled, "Look What We're Becoming." It was covered in notes from teenagers who hadn't been told they mattered until they got here. That's when I saw her. Callista. She stood just inside the door. No camera, no entourage. Just her, holding a coffee she clearly didn't intend to drink. "I'm not here to cause a scene," she said. I stayed by the bookshelf. "You're not famous here." She let out a small breath. "I watched your interview." I didn't answer. "You weren't wrong," she said. "I just wasn't brave." For a second, I thought about all the things I could throw at her, but I didn't need to. "I don't need you to own what happened," I said, voice even. "I've already reclaimed it." She nodded once. That was it. No hug, no tears. Just a moment. And it was enough. The following spring, I stood behind a podium as our foundation officially opened its doors. The audience was full, former foster kids, social workers, local leaders, and friends who had become family. I didn't speak about what happened to me. I spoke about what came after. "Absence," I said, "teaches you things presence never could, like how to hold yourself up and how to build for others what you never had." At the back of the room, Mylise stood by a tribute table. On it sat a photo of me at 10 years old, the one taken outside crisis care. Beside it was a plaque. proof that being left behind is not the end. When the speech ended, I hugged Melis tighter than I expected. She whispered, she'd be proud of you, and I believed her. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I lit a candle and pulled out a letter I'd never planned to send. To Vera and Lenric. It wasn't filled with fire, just honesty. You didn't break me, I wrote, but you did leave pieces I had to carry longer than I deserved. I folded it once, then twice, set it in a dish by the window, watched the flame curl the edges, blacken the middle, then reduce it all to ash. And just like that, I let it go. Weeks later, in the garden behind the foundation, I sat on a bench while one of our students ran laps along the path. She was 12, sharp, observant, and loud in the best way. She stopped suddenly and asked, "Do you ever wish they came back and said sorry?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said, smiling gently, because I stopped needing an apology to move forward. She nodded like she understood, then took off running again. I sat alone, watching the trees sway in the wind. For once, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like arrival. This wasn't a happy ending, but it was mine, and that was enough. Looking back, I don't carry bitterness. I carry clarity. What happened to me wasn't fair, but fairness isn't guaranteed in life. What is guaranteed is our choice, to stay silent or to speak up, to repeat the hurt or to build something better. I chose to build. If you've ever felt discarded, unseen, or like your story didn't matter, let this be proof that it does. You are not invisible. You are not a footnote. You get to write the ending. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to reclaim your own narrative? Have you been erased or forced to start over from nothing? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story touched your heart. Tell me what state you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, I'd still love to know why. Let's talk about it. If you want more real stories that speak truth and healing, subscribe to this channel and stay with us. We're just getting started.